Okay, we're going to talk about scouting and competitive assessment in the FRC. So I'm Jim Zonek from Chrysler, from Team 33, and Isaac Wright from BAE Systems. Next slide. So I'm an apps development manager for Chrysler. Cool stuff, but apps in cars is cool. Emerging technology. I've been the team leader of First Team 33 since 1998. So I've been doing FRC for a long time.
My name is Isaac Wright, BAE Systems. I'm a mobility staff engineer there. What that means is it's all the bits that make big defense vehicles go. So I primarily work on tracked vehicles, which ironically, I mean, it's nearly 1-to-1. Same power to weight ratio, same linked over width, all sorts of neat stuff. So we do from engine all the way to track in the groups that I work with. The primary vehicle being the Bradley. So.
Tanks, cool stuff. Okay, next slide. Okay, quote of the day. Go ahead.
Okay, Sun Tzu, Art of War. Who's heard of that book? So, fantastic book written a couple thousand years ago or something like that, and a bunch of neat stuff in it. The quote that I really like that I think comes and talks a lot to scouting is this one here, and it's, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So notice there's two parts to that. Knowing the enemy and knowing yourself. Some teams are good at one and not so good at the other. So scouting is really a collaborative effort on that, and that's what we hope to cover today.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So why scout? Scouting is very important. I think it's one of the most underrated things in the FRC for a lot of intermediate class teams. Most of the very good teams really put a gigantic effort into scouting and consider it very valuable. A lot of the up-and-coming teams don't really understand why to scout, how to scout, and what the goal of scouting should be. So good quality, accurate scouting is one of the key ingredients to a successful weekend. To the point made earlier in the quote is, it is about knowing how good you are, how good the other teams are, what everyone is capable of doing individually and collectively. So your ability to put that story together in a quick way and comprehensive way that your strategy team can use the output of the data collection, very important. And it can be remarkably difficult to do. Some teams make it easy, so there's right ways and wrong ways. So again, successful teams put considerable effort into doing this. I'm always sometimes blown away by the lengths some teams go to collect and amass scouting data. Without proper scouting as a coach, I'll tell you, as a coach, so I'm the competition drive coach. I've been a competition drive coach my whole FRC career. I actually watch very few matches. I tend to be with the robot. I'm one of the technical leads on my team as well. So I'm in the pits a lot with the robot. I'm reviewing things with my comm team. I'm on the practice field a lot, tuning things. I don't actually get to see that many matches. Without scouting data and a scouting team to tell me what to do, I would be flying blind at least 50% of the time.
So one of my favorite quotes from Jim was, when did you start announcing? 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
2009. Yes.
2009. He goes, wow, it was really refreshing. I actually got to watch the competition and saw more than about 20 matches that weekend.
Yeah.
So
your competition coach is probably in a similar situation as I am in many cases, and so will rely almost implicitly on the advice of the scouts for a lot of matches. It's rare that you are good enough to not care what your partners do and not care what the opponents are going to do and just play. To get the most out of every match, you need to be able to size it up and tailor your strategy accordingly. I mean, good scouting information will allow all members of your alliances to make the most out of every match. Scouting is not just for you. It's actually for the other members of your alliance. If you understand what they can do, you can best guide them on how to play with you, especially if they're not doing this very actively themselves. If they are, then you can have a great discussion about, we see you doing this, you see us doing this, how can we work together, right? A good pick list is very important for alliance selection. Every week I see somebody go up for alliance selection with no pick list. And then you're looking up at the board and the audience is screaming at them. You'll never see the Killer Bees do that. We always make sure we have a pick list and that the pick list is well constructed, agreed upon, and distributed before the alliance selection begins.
who should make one, by the way? Everybody.
Every
Even
team.
us. Yep.
Even you.
Even the nerds.
Every team should make a pick list.
Even if you're ranked 64th, have that list, because if the number 4 alliance picks you, you get up there and they say, hey, we have no clue. Guess what? Now you're running the show.
Yep.
So, or you're standing up there with them going, give me a random number.
That's right. And important about the pick list too, even if you think you're not gonna be picked, and even if you're right, developing a pick list is a skill. It takes a while to figure out how to do that properly. I'm always really proud of, we actually usually grade my scouts after the tournament on how accurate their pick list is compared to what actually happened in the draft order. And sometimes they go 24 for 24 on actually calling the picks. Okay, next slide. What is scouting? Scouting is as much about your own team as it is about the other teams. This is very important. It's you, again, the know thyself is you have to know what you do and figure out how to best play with them. So you're really looking for attributes that will augment your strategy or maybe contradict with your strategy. You know, something really obvious this year is where do they shoot from? You know, do they shoot from the same position as we do, right? If they're always trying to go to the same position as you are and you have a preferred spot, I mean, that's something to definitely know in your scouting information. So those are, a lot of it is about knowing what you want, what you need, what types of robot will augment your gameplay. The goal of scouting is to figure out how your team can best work with your 2 alliance partners against 3 opponents and produce a well thought out pick list. And it's a process of collecting objective and subjective data on all the teams at the event, including your own team. A lot of teams make the mistake of not scouting their own team. I think that's really foolish. I really like, as the coach, objective data on exactly how many shots we attempted, exactly how many runs we took, exactly how many points we made. Everything that we do, I want the same data on everybody else that I want on my own team. It allows me to objectively critique what we do. There's several different types of scouting. So scouting isn't limited to just one area. There's actually 4 main types of scouting that we do. Pre-scouting before the event. Before the event, you know, I'm gonna make a cool color-coded sheet that looks like this, that gives me an immediate rundown of what everyone who's at this event has done this season. So before the event, you can put all that together, and we'll cover that in a little more detail. Pit scouting, this is essentially a static review of the robots at the event. Match scouting is observation and data collection of the actual matches, and then analytical methods, which are somewhat new into the FRC the last 3 or 4 years, but are really gaining hold, is statistical analysis of the match results and the data feeds that are coming live through Twitter and through the FMS posts and stuff that we all now have access to, the great world of mobile technology. So, next slide. Pre-scouting. So this is before the event. The great thing about pre-scouting is if you have one person who really wants to do this, it can make a really big difference in your weekend. You can do this offline. The events are always weekends apart. There's going to be 4 or 5 days between when all the events before yours terminate and when yours will begin. You got 4 or 5 days to put this together, so there's really no time crunch. Again, I make a little color-coded sheet. You know, it tells me everybody who's here, you know, what their world rank is, what their OPR numbers are, where they place in all the different tournaments, and which tournaments they went to, and what their overall event rank is, and I got it all on one page. And it's color-coded, and that means something to us. Most of that's generated with macros. Software and macros will really help you with this, which are actually remarkably easy to learn how to do. Even a ubiquitous program like Microsoft Excel that everybody has, you can just generate all this stuff from the available data or from the available published databases with literally one click of a button once you've got it set up.
And really important, some of the stuff that's out there, Ed's database and some of the stuff that the other folks are doing on Chief Delphi, you can pull those down and gather this information without macros in about an hour's time frame. Yeah. Jim's a great programmer. He writes stuff and he's like, bang, and it just generates things. I'm not a great programmer, but in about an hour and a half time, I can give almost the same data that he's got because there's other folks doing that stuff out there.
So what we do is we compile the results for all teams. Like we'll get match scores, win-loss, rank position, draft position, all these things. So before the event, we'll look at who is going to the event, what they have done in the past, and what they are going to do. Another thing that a lot of people really miss is this one. Despite the fact that we build a new robot every year, the results from prior years can be amazingly accurate. This is haunting, actually. Opening week events, week one events, I can predict tournament outcomes with about 80% accuracy with the stuff that we do on robots that I've never even seen, just based on who's going there and what they've done over the last 3 years. Teams are teams that build a good robot in 6 weeks and can build one that delivers to the game objectives will very much tend to do it again. Teams that are late starters and mature through the season and have a robot that is done near the end, a lot of time if you project their same results from last year onto this year into the opening event, they're very, very similar. The numbers are all different, but the success ratios and everything are very, very similar. Teams will increase and decrease, and they're slope limited year to year most of the time. So you can predict your opening events with no data, and actually come in with a relatively large amount of confidence, and I recommend that you try to do that. Yeah, there's a very strong correlation between past performance and future results on almost every team, right? You know, someone like Hot, you can say, wow, Hot's having a tough year, they haven't won any tournaments yet. Yeah, well, good, bad, or otherwise, they still have the second highest total OPR number coming into this championship event. So even though it's a tough year for them, they have successfully built a good robot, every year continuously for over a decade, and they will continue to do so, right? One of the biggest things with that, actually, that you'll find when you study that is one of the most, the strongest thing that contributes to a team's continuing success is continuity of leadership, is the people on the team are really what make the team go. If they have the same people year to year, they will tend to produce very similar
And
results.
conversely, when you see a step function, you normally see a change in leadership.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, if a team gets really, takes a big step down or a big step up, it usually something happens. Okay, next slide. Pit scouting. This is known as static review or a walk around. You go through the pits and you review all the machines. Really recommend you do this. When you watch them on the field, you see what they do. Doesn't really tell you how they work. A lot of type things to keep track of are types of drivetrain, what type of features they have. In this year's game, you would say, do they have any elevation control? Do they have a floor pickup? Do they have a wraparound shooter or a straight shooter, right? Are they tall, are they short? A bunch of things like that. Wheel types. Different teams will have different pet peeves about things on here. There's some teams that, some teams love mechanical drive, some teams hate mechanical drive. Some people like certain types of robots. Your preferences are up to you and what you put on the attribute list, but you should go around and try to catalog all of that. And that's a great thing for team members to do. Now, involve your students in this because they learn a lot about the different types of robots. Most of the students on your team, really for the most part, have only ever worked on your robot your way. This is one of the best ways that they can learn about how the other robots are built and the priorities of a lot of teams. Also, talk to the teams. I actually recommend against doing the list where you come around and go, hey, how many wheels does your robot have? Does it pick up from the floor? Do you have a shooter? Avoid really obvious questions like that where it's just a checkbox. But talk to the teams about what their robots do. Most teams will love to tell you all about their robot. And certainly if they've been out before and they're coming out again, ask them specifically if they have made improvements. Again, to talk about data later is you have data on what they did at their first, second, third district. But if they put a new floor collector or a new shooter on it, that would be good to know. You can watch them, and they're probably going to, they're going to get better or they're going to get worse, depending on how well that happened. But they probably will not stay the same if they've made a major change, right? And always check the facts against actual performance. This is one thing that's kind of cool. Most teams have a tendency to be optimistic about their own performance. I don't believe they actually lie intentionally, but most teams are very proud of the robot that they've made, and they'll tell you all these wonderful things that it can do. They'll tell you that we designed it to do 5 runs and shoot from anywhere on the field, and it can shoot all the way down the court, and all of those things are true. The actual success ratio is almost always less than a team will actually tell you. So you can write down that they do 16 feet per second and that they can shoot 20 discs, but you're going to want to correlate that against your actual data.
And this is also true of your own team. Frequently, you will see stuff on the field that isn't real. So after 8 or 9 matches, you put together that perfect match in your brain, and you are convinced that your robot's doing something it's not. Like, oh, we always do five cycles. It's like, well, actually, you always do 3, usually do 4, and once you've done 5. Or once you did 5 and a half. Yeah. So But your brain will do that to where it has that highlight reel and just puts it all together in one match, so.
Yeah, so it's a good thing to check those numbers, but I like to ask teams about that and right, it's what they design, typically it's what they designed it to do. It may not be what it actually does. Okay, next. Match scouting. So Isaac's gonna go into more detail on match scouting. Match scouting is the toughest part. This is where all the grunt work is. It takes a considerable effort to do this properly. It basically requires a team of people to watch every match, right? A lot of teams do this. A lot of teams have organized groups to do this. Some teams collaborate and do this together. What we do is, the exact data we're going to collect will change every year depending on the game design, right? Obviously, shooting basketballs is irrelevant in this year, and bouncing on the bridge and things is irrelevant this year. So we customize our data collection around the game design each year, and we do that very proactively early in the build season. We'll already start working out what our scouting sheet is going to look like and how the data entry will be done, based on what we see as the priorities in our strategic analysis of the game. We typically have a group of 7 students to do our data collection. We'll have 1 student per match, per robot, plus a leader to help coordinate the whole thing. So it's usually a 7-man effort to do this. The goal is to collect objective and subjective data on each robot in each match. We collect all kinds of, number of shots taken, number of shots made, which goals they're shooting on, their starting position, their end hanging position, the drive paths that they tend to take on the field, and Liza will go into that. But there's a whole host of things that will be important to us that we're going to want to know when we go to build our pick list and do our scouting assessment. Be sure to collect penalty data. This is often overlooked. A team that garners a lot of penalties often can have a huge outcome of the game. First games tend to have a relatively high penalty load relative to the mean score. So if you have someone who does get a lot of penalties, you'll want to make sure that's on your scouting sheet. And I mean, a good data set for all matches and all teams will allow you to evaluate both capability and consistency. It is a key point. Some teams, in some matches they'll score 80 points, in some matches they'll score 10. Right? We have data on teams that are doing that this year, where there's occasionally matches where they score many points, occasionally matches that they score few. Really being able to boil that out into some kind of trust factor around what you can actually expect if you play with them in qualifying, or if you play with them or against them in eliminations is the key to knowing how to compete against a team like that and what you do, right? And whether or not you take the risk because you're in an alliance that is maybe unlikely to advance, or you're in one where you have more surety. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. And again, some teams collaborate together to do data collection. There are groups of teams in the FRC that, because they don't want to permanently deploy 7 students, they do data collection as a group, but it requires agreement on the attributes you're going to collect.
And while Jim says 7 here, it's really, there are 7 there at a time.
Yes.
We have about 15, 15 very regular, 20, the other 5 kind of float in and out a little bit.
I think I have that on the next
So,
slide.
okay.
Yeah, next. So, many teams have great trouble with scouting. This is a key point. Is students hate it and thus do a poor job. You can't do a good job of something you hate. So the key to scouting is making people not hate it. It is the key, right? You have to make them not hate it. You have to turn it into a valuable task that people actually want to do. Some of the first stuff is make them understand the benefit of it. Review the results from it. And try to make it fun. It can be a tiring, boring task sometimes, right? Despite this, never treat it like it's a lower tier task. It's an important task. It's vital to your success. So it's one of the most important things you're going to do in the weekend is collect that. If you happen to be in a picking position or you get pegged, it's vital that you have this. And even if the output doesn't get used every time, you need to have a clear, defined methodology for collecting this data, constructing your pick list, prioritizing the other teams, doing the negotiation, and all the things, and the data is at the foundation of that. So we rotate our students in shifts. So we'll rotate them in and out as necessary, but we never make anybody sit there and watch all 80 or 120 matches.
That's a especially big deal here first in Michigan on Friday. Friday is a very long day. And if you expect somebody to do a 10-hour shift of scouting, by the end of the day, the quality is going to be dramatically worse in the data that they're taking.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the stuff that we do to give scouting esteem on our team, I mean, we praise the scouts for the quality of their pick list. We review the pick list created by the scouts in open forum with the team after the event. We, a lot of times, will compare it to the quality of maybe more advanced methods that other teams are using and show how what our guys are doing is better. We like to call that out. The same we do comparative analysis on robots and scores and things like that. We'll actually assess the quality of our scouting team's results against the other teams when we can to show them that they are doing a good job. Our student scouting leaders, that title, that is an earned position. We don't just assign that. Students actually compete for this title. And it's kind of an elite thing to actually be the scouting lead on the Killer Bees. So they are competing for that to be better. Yeah.
Is that per event or per season?
Per season, typically.
Does that scout end up being your team captain to pick on the field? Is that?
Quite often, we will send our scout lead out to do the actual alliance selection process, not the driver. Actually, occasionally we'll send a driver. It really depends. It depends on the year and the nature of the person. But the scouting lead always has that option to be that person by first choice.
So this year, our scouting lead's on crutches, so
Yeah.
last year's scouting lead is still going out for the pick list.
Yeah.
Two quick questions. What do you think about like comments or like in notes, not just?
We always have a note
Incredibly
section.
valuable.
Incredibly valuable.
We'll
A
get
lot
to that
of
in the pick list.
A lot of the anecdotal stuff that happens, you know, I don't know, drives well, flipped over and started burning, whatever you want. Those are things that are relevant, and probably there's not enough of them to have a category for them as an individual item on your sheet or in your GUI. So you will always want a place to put those always, right? So I think, you know, and again, figuring out a way to make this an esteemed role greatly improves the willingness of our students to do a good job. This is something where I think it's one of the big successes of our team. How long ago was it, Isaac? 6 years ago? Around 6 years ago. We really started to put a lot of priority on doing organized competitive assessment and trying to turn it into something that the students actually wanted to do. Because we found the first thing was true is if they hated doing it and didn't really care, they would never do a good enough job of it to be useful to us, and it's a vicious circle.
Yeah. They absolutely hated it. We made it mandatory, you know, and
They were sentenced.
we didn't do a good job in here.
Yeah.
And we reprimanded students for not scouting,
Yeah,
and yeah, that was not the right thing to do.
yeah. So I think everything, again, you have to do a good job, you have to like doing it. Excellent.
Well,
Yeah.
if you have a smaller team and you only have like 8 people in the stands max, like, is there anything you can do so you can try and get all the matches, but like?
We'll talk about that a little bit later in the data ones. I mean, some of the things you might do is maybe be more selective about which teams you're watching. When we get to the pick list section, maybe we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Have you guys ever had problems with the drive team and the drive coach ever, like, listening to the scouts?
I'm the drive coach. I take the scouting information as input. It is not a directive. If the scouting team tells me play this match this way, that's their opinion. I always have last right of refusal as the drive coach to play it the way I feel that it needs to be. But they are there to provide data to me on what these teams do.
So real important, one thing that Jim does really well is we'll talk afterwards. He'll come up and tell the scouting team, this is why we didn't do what happened. So
Yeah.
you asked for such and such to be a blocker the entire time. And when we brought that idea up to them, they said, no, we want to score, and we're not interested in doing that. And just like, you think it's hard getting somebody to scout that doesn't want to scout? Try and convince somebody to play a role on an alliance that they have no intention of, they will not do a good job for you. So at that point in time,
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it too, is if you have a lot of information saying, this team always plays defense, right? If you try to flip that guy and put him on offense, he's probably not gonna be very good at it because his team isn't trained to do that. They have no on-field experience doing that, so you'll probably wanna put him in a defensive role and figure out the best way to deploy that. You can talk to them about that, because it could be somewhere else they played it a different way, and we usually do. But the scouts provide input to me, and typically in every match, they will give me a recommended course of action. And again, I always follow up with them. I never flat-handedly disregard their input. I will always discuss with them if we change it.
And that's important towards the coach getting quality scouting. Because if you do 5 recommendations and all 5 of them get ignored in a row,
You're gonna stop doing
at
it.
that point in time, you're like, yeah, they're on the field.
He never
you need
listens to
play
me
against them.
anyway.
There you go.
So,
So you gotta have a good relationship there.
yeah. Okay, next, I think now we get into yours, data entry. So, okay, we'll talk just a little bit about this, but there's a lot of methods of data entry. Some people just go to great lengths on this, some people do next to nothing, some people just have a notebook with lined paper. There's a lot of different things you can do. The methods vary from pencils to iPads and everything in between. Just like with your robot design, knowing your own team's capabilities and your limitations is the key to doing this right. There is no right answer on how to scout. I will say with a lot of things is you gotta work within your comfort level and your skill level. My personal experience is, even though I'm a programmer, computers in the stands are a distraction to my scouting team. I don't know why, but it just is a truth that I've never found to be untrue. It is always true. Technology is great, but it comes with,
Could very well just be a Notre Dame prep thing.
could be a Notre Dame prep thing, I don't know, but I try to.
I would caution, I see an awful lot of solitaire when I look down at other teams. so
Yeah,
just-
exactly. So I put a computer in front of them, and it's just got a new portal for goofing off, especially if there's Wi-Fi access, right? So, sometimes the basics are better. Technology is great. I never have to worry about the batteries dying on my paper sheets, right? I don't have some of the failure modes that you have with more advanced methods. We use a customized scouting sheet redesigned every year by Isaac. I review it always to see that I like and it encompasses all the attributes that we need. But he always designs it, works with his scouting crew kids and the scouting leader to go through, does this work? And again, just like with the robot, we iterate it. We use it at the first tournament. If there's weaknesses in it, we'll create a new one and publish it. We use computerized methods for both the pre-scouting and analytical phases. And we do a lot of compiling of the paper data in the post-event world for subsequent events like the MSC. We've got a pretty big body of data on what all the teams did at the other events. But I think simplicity in a paper solution has been the best course of action for our team. Okay. And I think you're up, you can talk about something.
Okay, this is a specific sheet that we use for, or sometimes we'll do a note card that follows the exact same format. So this is what this is what I refer to as match scouting. And this is where you're providing notes to a coach. If you have a small team, this I consider essential. You only need one person to do this style of scouting. What it basically is you have a list of all the teams that are there. You're gonna take notes on every team that's there during some point in the weekend. Priority is on who your partners and opponents are. So as soon as the match schedule comes out, you highlight your teams and you make out a card
Make out 12.
or a sheet or whatever for every
We do
single
them on
match that you
3x5
got.
cards.
If Jim likes cards, that's what he gets. So he's the coach, remember, you gotta have that working relationship. I like to do it on paper, Jim says, I hate paper, give me a card.
I don't like it folded up. I like to be able to take it out of my back pocket, look at it, put it back in. Right?
So guess what? He gets cards.
Yep.
So what you're going through here is you're trying to write up what your partner and opponent does. So typically we like to watch one match before or 2 matches before. For the very first match of the day, you really only have your pit scouting or any previous pre-scouting that you've done towards making this assessment. So here, it's not too bad to make the assessment. Week 1 event, it's all about the pits. So World Championship, it's 50% about the pits because there's a lot of robots there that you've never seen and don't have access to video for. You notice that there's all 3 phases called out. It's very important. A robot that spins in circles in autonomous or just drives into the wall is not doing nothing. So this is very, very important. It's doing something. You need to call that out because if they line that thing up to point at your robot while you're trying to take shots, all of a sudden it drives into you and smashes you into the tower, it can be a big deal. So not successful attempts is different than doing nothing, even if it just twitches, in place. Okay, twitches in place, Take a note on that. Teleop, Drive, what they regularly do, bonus. This year, it's climbing. Last year was the bridge,
What will
just cover that
typically be
kind of
on these cards is these will be a summation of the stuff that we see.
Yep.
You know, again, you're, in a given tournament, you'll have 24 partners, occasionally get a duplicate partner, so maybe it's, 22. And then opponents will be mixed, there won't be 36, because some of these will be duplicates of the exact same stuff that you saw in the partner category. So, in a district, this is a manageable set of data. A lot of times what they're doing is they're just, they'll have a notepad with just all the team numbers on it, and every time somebody comes out, they'll say, how many auto points did they get?
Yep.
And, it'll be 12, 18, 0, 6, and they just write a couple numbers in there and tell me. And then a lot of times it'll be, did 2 volleys, drove around aimlessly, whatever they want to put in
Loads
there.
at the feeder station, collects off the ground. The notes are helpful.
The notes are helpful. A lot of times stuff that'll go in the notes will be, flipped over in match 5,
Yep.
right? And then if I go to negotiate with the coach or the other team, I'll be able to say, so you flipped over in match 5, tell me what happened there, and I can see if I'm gonna get an honest answer or whether that's gonna happen again, right? And they'll say, oh, no, we drove in a pile of frisbees and flipped over, because a lot of times the kids watching won't know the exact situation, or they'll say, Rush smashed into us and we flipped over, whatever. They'll be able to explain that, and I'll know how much risk there is in the match that I'm about to do.
So on the back, typically we'll write down the strategy if it's not intuitive from the notes that are coming from it, okay? So if it's a non-intuitive strategy, we'll cover there. So like last year, blocking certain spots at certain times. So there's an alley where folks could bounce basketballs or something like that. Having your third partner, Clint, there at Kettering, park in a very specific spot, made the other team lose about 6 balls that they were making, and that's what helped us win there in Kettering together. So that's a non-obvious thing. Otherwise, if it follows the obvious, it's just do what you normally do, that sort of thing.
I like to always have so what we do is it's a double-sided card, it'll have this information on the front, and on the back they write a strategy recommendation for every match. I like them to always figure that out, even write that down, even if it's obvious. This game, sometimes it's really obvious. You just go out and you just try to score more frisbees than the other guy. There's not a lot of strategy, and you just full on offense blitz and hope you score more than the other guy. Sometimes you gotta play it kind of carefully to figure out how to deploy the other guy. Regardless of what the answer is, I want them to write it down so that I know what my strategy team is thinking, because they have done more observation than I have.
For you young guys, don't get too carried away with the strategy.
Yep.
If you've got 16 bullet points in the strategy and you've got it choreographed every 3 seconds, guess what? That's probably why the coach isn't listening to you. It should have like a couple main points, in Auton, you take the such and such spot, do this during teleop, and block such and such from getting the bonus.
Yeah.
That's a complicated strategy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay.
this is our scouting sheet from this year. So shout out to 3929, the Dragons. We had previously done where we had like little modules, and we've got them posted up on Chief Delphi where each match was a module, and we liked that sheet quite a bit. And then the Dragons posted this one up. And I knew other teams had used similar formatting before, but I really hadn't considered it until this year. I didn't like that we ended up flipping the page back and forth when you're trying to do your pick list stuff. And this way you can get all 12 matches on the same sheet. What I also like about it is like everything's in columns, so you can look in the column and see when a team's progressing. So a team may, in Auton, only average 6 points, but it was 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18. Guess what?
Means they fixed something.
Yeah, and they're not gonna come out with 6 points. They're gonna come out with 18.
Their average might be 0, but midway through the match.
Right, so you can see trends a lot better that way. This section down in here, if you look, it's a really crude representation of what the field is, okay? So this is the pyramid, these are the frisbees in the starting configuration, that's the 3-point goal, that's the two-point goals, and that's the 1-point goal. We use that to put a little circle on where the starting spot is for the match, and then we'll write numbers next to it if that's the same spot. If they move to a different spot for a different match, we'll put that. What you'll see on that is frequently in your Auton, somebody will be 18, 18, 0, 18, 18, 0, 18, 18, 0. And you look, and where they're 0, they're out of their good spot. Okay?
Starting position gets
So
pushed.
instead of being in the middle, they're over on the corner. Well, why are they on the corner? Well, because
They're playing with
469 is
the
running the
gorillas.
7 disc, So that's something to keep in mind. If you've got the 7 disc and you gotta move them, well, they're not an 18, they're a 0.
Yeah.
Because they're out of position. We ended up having 2 sections on it just because early on, teams were trying a lot of different stuff. And it was getting kind of muddled, so we had 2 there. Most of it we try to take from a scoring perspective, objective data, from a defense and driving is subjective. Our lead scout, he likes to rate things 1 through 4. We used to do 1 through 5 and we got too many 3s. 1 through 4 forces someone to say
Better
they're a
or
little
less?
above or a little below average. So, so the 1 through 4 works out well. Some folks will do 10s, it just gets too confusing. Somebody's 6 is completely different than somebody's 4. But, you know, a 2 and a 3, it's pretty consistent, even for subjective data. And then somebody was asking about comments. Who was that? Okay. In the comments here, these are incredibly valuable, incredibly valuable. So we're going to go to pick list, I think, next, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
To me, the one thing I'll say about this is, like, as the person who's usually the receiver of all this data, the one thing I tell a lot of teams who are starting to do scouting and stuff is, I do not want a phone book. I do not want thousands of pages of data or a single printout for every team on every match or something like that. This I like because it puts, for a given team, the entire qualifying process for the entire event is summarized on one sheet, and I can at a glance to see trends and basically view consistency without really any numeric analysis.
When you're
I just
targeting
look
2
down
teams, you can
here,
pull the 2 sheets and
yeah, I
just
can just pull the 2 sheets and I can look at this and go, this guy is better, look at this guy, right? The whole day on Saturday, he's hitting all his ententes and he's hanging every single time. This guy's been mixed all weekend. Numerically, if I run that through any kind of analysis program, it would give me approximately equality between the 2 guys, but I can really look at the trends in one place on this sheet because that's what I care about. Pick lists.
Okay, so doing a pick list, make sure you've got a list of all the teams at their event. So a lot of times folks will try to remember the team numbers when they start to put a pick list together. Getting beyond 16 is really hard if you don't have a list to go through. We'd like to do a sorting. We've done sorting of 5 when we were giving them the 5 grading. That was kind of messy. We went to 4. That was still kind of messy. Jim's been pushing for this and I really, really like it. And it's the yes, no, maybe system. And it's yes goes here, maybe goes here, no goes there. And you do that sort, and then you count your yeses and your maybes, okay? Real important, how many teams are playing in a lens?
24.
Okay, so you gotta have at least 24 yeses and maybes. So if you count up all your yeses and maybes and you only get to 16, you gotta go revisit that no pile and figure out 8 of those no's that are actually gonna play.
Should
In
be
reality,
easy here.
you should find more. Yeah, here you should
Here
have
be
an
easy.
abundance. At a district, it can sometimes get tough. It depends on the event. So always have at least 24. That's how you do your cursory sort.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. Then this is a format that we like to use for our pick list. So you've got 1 through 24. Bubble, we try to find like 6 teams that we would be, you know, okay using them as the 24th spot. Again, assume like you're the number 1 guy. And then DNP, we use that for the do not pick. There are lots of reasons why somebody might go into that category. So sometimes it's they do the exact same thing as you and like it wouldn't work out. So it's just not going to work out. Sometimes it's because they break down a whole bunch. You know, they've had 3 breakdowns over the weekend and it's just really sketchy. Sometimes it's penalty box. So so you'll have that frequently where a team gets a lot of penalties and you end up putting them in there. So different teams have their different reasons on this section here. But try to get, you got to get to 24, including yourself. Try to get a handful of extras because when you're working with another team, you may find that one of the teams that's in your 24 is in their DMP, you know, because they had a bad experience. So it's good to be able to work through that.
And sometimes it's for non-obvious things, right? I mean, and very important, coaches and drivers alike. I mean, this is very important, right? Like if you have a team who can score some points, but won't take strategy advice, like especially if they're not honest about that. Like if you negotiate with a team before a match and say, here's what we're going to do, and then the power comes on and they do something else entirely. That usually, even if they were successful doing it, because they didn't really discuss that before the match or come with a strategy adjustment during the match, that usually will degrade them in our minds, meaning that if I negotiate strategy with you in eliminations, can I trust that you're actually gonna do it, or are you gonna go do something else, right? A lot of these things are not necessarily observable from the objective data that the scouts are taking, but if we know that, it plays into the pick
So
list and the D and
Your
D
coach
list.
has to have input
Yeah.
in on the list.
Coach has to have input.
Do you rank yourself in that pick
Yes.
list, or do you always put yourself number one?
No, we always include ourselves.
When we're doing it, now frequently when we bring the list out to the field, if we're the number one person, we'll throw ourselves up at the 1 slot, or we'll put ourselves at the 24th slot. Just occasionally there's teams that are sensitive to that sort of stuff. So that's why our list that goes out on the field will tend to be in one of those two positions. Usually the 24, but if we're number one, we'll go ahead and put it up there.
Important some things about pick lists. The intriguing things about pick lists is a lot of people put a lot of priority on the good. That's actually the least important part of the pick list. Everybody knows the Lots Grills are good. Everybody knows that Hod's good. Everybody knows that the Fighting Pie is good, right? You're at an event, picking the top couple guys is almost irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant. You already know, in fact, scouting them in many times is irrelevant. You just ask yourself the question, it's like rating the hot girls at the dance, If they ask me to dance, would I say yes, of course. It doesn't even matter which one it is, I'm the one, right? So it's the same sort of thing here. So grading the top couple guys sometimes and spending a lot of time collecting data about how many shots Hot takes. If you're not better than them and don't think you're gonna be in a position to actually ever pick them, then their position on your pick list really doesn't matter. And a lot of times you can threshold this, and the top 7 or 8 of them, it really doesn't even matter what order you put them in. It's the 9 through 24 that's the hardest. The most difficult thing about making a pick list is being able to accurately predict this team. If you can do that, it means you've got everything else right. And your goal is to be able to do that, to accurately predict the 24th team. And how do you do that, right? So,
It seems to me that the picks from 21 to 24 seem to change in strategy. Do you see that happening for you
It
guys?
depends on the game. It really, really depends on the game. Like 2009, no, that wasn't a big delta there. 2010, it really depended on what style of play you wanted to play. There was where you could play like the 3 offensive, like zone mobility thing,
right.
or you could do the 3 zone game and have 3 distinct specialists. And at that point in time, you'd have this really weird thing where you had 2 lists, and it was, if they're available, take this one. If not, then move to other list, take this one. If those 2 are gone, then move back, and it would get weird.
Yeah.
But it depends game to game, but usually your first pick is mostly about who can help me score a lot of points. And your second pick is a more strategic pick, which doesn't always mean defense, but it's a more
not always
strategic
mean
pick.
defense. Certainly this weekend, it probably will not, right? So if you look at the stats on this weekend, the 24th best team here is probably worth something functionally equivalent to somewhere around like 40 points a match.
Yeah, 40.
That is certainly not a defensive robot by nature. It doesn't mean you can't deploy them for defense, but solely deploying them for defense is probably not the best strategic move, right? Because they have so much offensive potential, right? So when we make a pick list, again, our pick list, what we usually do is, we go through the top teams. A lot of times we will assess how we think the weekend is gonna play out. We do Friday after the tournament. So we usually go out to dinner and do it over dinner. And we will go through how we think the tournament will play out. We've got some very good analytical methods that can usually predict the remaining, 20 matches or so that are typically on Saturday. You're through, at a district, you're through 60, you're gonna play 20 more. You can usually predict the outcome with about 80% integrity, and you know where a lot of the teams are gonna fall.
You get 6 of 8 alliance captains.
You'll get 6 of 8 alliance captains picked out of that. So if you're above those, that kind of matters, I guess, but it really doesn't, because you get to pick all of them. And if you're below them, then it doesn't, those top guys don't really matter either, unless you're figuring you're going to decline.
So once we make our cursory list, we'll go through, figure out, and we'll do what we call the event pick list, where it's like, okay, who would they pick? And work around to where you can see who's gonna be back around. So if you're number 4 seed, who's gonna be back around when we get to 20? If you're number 7 seed, who's left in this pocket down here of these picks, because of the serpentine draft? So you wanna figure out those pockets, but we'll run through that to see, okay, what do we think's gonna be around and when's it gonna be around? That way we can really pay attention on what kind of third partner we're gonna get.
Do you ever think just doing the exercise, even if like you are, say, 39th at the event, just purely doing the exercise of who, if we were number one, who to pick? I mean,
Yeah,
people like
We
starting.
do that.
The more you do the exercise, the better at it you get.
Yeah, because eventually you'll be, if you keep doing this, eventually you'll, or teams have on years and off years, and hopefully you get a year where you are on the number one alliance, or you are in a strong picking position, and you need to know how to handle that, and be able to go through all those contingencies, right? The possibilities here are not infinite, they're finite. But on Friday night, the possibilities of the outcome of the tournament are finite, and usually most of the key ones can be predicted. And if you can put yourself in the right position and analyze those, and say, oh yeah, look at that, 469 is gonna be with hot again, okay? What are we gonna do about that? Because we're likely to end up fourth. But this other team, 44-44, it looks like they had a cake schedule, and they're gonna end up third and they're above us. So would you decline them if you pick them? And if you don't, then, if you decline number 2, and you're sitting at 5, that means
It's
there's
the
like
best
4
case
more
scenario.
good
What's the
teams that
worst
are
case
gone.
scenario?
Are you gonna go, are you gonna stay, who would you pick, and who would be left if you make that choice? You can forecast all of that if you take the time to do it, and that's actually what we do for every tournament. Okay. Yeah, again, okay, so I think, is that enough on pick list?
So the only other thing I'll cover, and I think Fred will probably be interested in this one, so is be mindful of why somebody went on the DMP list. And so when at Waterford, our third partner, they drew a lot of fouls during qualifying. I think they were on everybody's DMP list because they had drawn like 5 or 6 technicals. And we get a lot of questions about, why did you pick that team? Okay? I had talked with them, and it was just, they just weren't aware. It wasn't that they weren't good to work with, it wasn't that, they had a bad bot or anything like that. They just were not actually aware of the fouls.
Yep.
And quality machine, quality mentors, quality students, they were absolute pleasure to work with. And so that's,
Yeah.
It was-
Even in the quarterfinals, they took quite a few fouls and we just kept coaching them, and by the finals, they were playing.
Yeah, and I
defense.
think in qualifying, what would really happen, they were a rookie team, they were sort of functionally unaware of some of these rules. They were getting penalties that aren't really called in real time necessarily that they see.
and they weren't really calling them out after the match.
And they're not really calling them out right away after the match. These guys leave the arena and aren't even aware that they got 2 20-point fouls in that last match. And their partners, I think, through the tournament would be like, stupid rookies, and we're not telling them of this failure, and so they were not correcting their own behavior. And all it took was a little bit of coaching from some senior teams, and they were able to win the event with us. And
And
they
as
were a
soon as
very valuable
they
pick.
were very helpful, I felt.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. Now, that being said, don't go out and pick a penalty bot for your 24th, because there are folks that you can't talk to, you know?
And there are teams, watch this one too, there are teams, always make sure, like, when you're doing negotiations with the pits, that you talk, with the teams, that you talk to the drivers too. This is something I learned many years ago, but I still see a lot of coaches do this wrong, is the drivers have control of the robot, not the coach. The coach sometimes has control of the drivers, but not always. If you're working with a coach who really doesn't have control of your drivers, and you're not talking to the drivers, it could be that you're talking to someone who has absolutely no bearing on the outcome of the match. You want to talk to the drive team, like peers, on what we're going to do in this match, and they make sure they understand what you're going to do.
Probably get moving.
Yep. Okay, analytical methods. This is a big part of most successful team scouting efforts. This has grown in recent years, and it gets easier and easier to do thanks to the internet and mobile technology. By using published match results from past matches and events, future match results can be predicted with over 80% accuracy in most cases. So we've got some people who spend a lot of time doing this. So for a team with limited resources, this can go a long way. If you have a small team, you say, I can't scout every match. You can take a lot of leading indicators from this and then really maybe check the key points manually and not have to do everything comprehensively. And this is very good. Like, we do this as the World Championship. I can't pre-scout the World Championship. I'm not in you know, Seattle and Florida. And I can't watch all the match video to see what 2:33 and everybody did. So
Not everybody's got a 23:37, you know, archived web video of their match where you can go back
Yeah,
and
not,
see
a lot of
It's
regions have no
available
such thing
everywhere.
like we have in Michigan. So a bunch
You
of,
can knock on first in Michigan.
a bunch of automated things to do this are Team Ed Law from 2834 posts weekly a scouting database that has all the results from every team at every match in the entire FRC for all 2,500 teams. So you can pull a tremendous amount of information out of this. The FRC Tracker app publishes OPR in real time, I think once you get through the third match of every event. So you can use that as a real-time assessment of what's actually going on in your tournament. The first OPR app that Michael Ray from T27 here wrote, and again, same sort of thing. You can just type in a team, it'll show you where they went, it'll show you the OPRs for everybody at the event, how they're graded in there. Very, very good numerical analysis. And of course, the FRC Twitter feed is in real time as soon as the matches are put up, squirting out Taliop, Auton, and hang results for every match. Clint?
Can I give a plug to
Yeah.
FRC Miner?
Yeah, sure.
So if you go to frcminer.com,
Yep.
it takes the Twitter feed and puts it in a graphical representation.
Oh, really?
And you can shut off Klein, and you can shut off Teliop and Auton, and it resorts.
Oh, I haven't even looked at that. Okay.
frcminer.com.
Okay, I'm gonna write that
It's
down.
pretty good. It's a
Okay.
good one.
If you are going out to the field and you realize you're number 8 alliance captain and you have nothing else to go off of, it's not that bad, it's
Yeah.
starting.
Okay, that's a great one, thank you, Clint.
I've heard a lot of mixed feelings on OPR, especially.
We can
with-
talk about OPR in a second, that's my next
Oh,
slide,
okay.
so let's talk about what OPR is. Who knows what OPR is? Raise your hand if you do. Looks like maybe half the room, the grown-ups do, so go to the next slide. OPR and CCWM. OPR, it's a bit of a misnomer. It got named this accidentally, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago, and the name sticks. Yeah, somebody randomly named it this, just made up a 3-letter acronym for this, and it got entrenched in the FRC vernacular. People have tried to change it unsuccessfully. I'm committed to just keeping it. It means offensive power rating. Basically what it means, it is a result of a bunch of linear algebra on your team. OPR is a computed number for the offensive contribution of a given team. The higher your OPR number, the more points your robot is probably scoring. Not certainly scoring, probably scoring. What it basically means is, if your number is high, that good things are happening when you're on the field. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're the one scoring, it just means when you are on the field, more good things are happening than maybe the other people with lower numbers. The math, however, assumes that your robot is potential. Your robot's potential is the same for every match and an event. It's basically trying to come up with a cumulative grading score for the quality of your robot relative to everyone else's.
That's a very powerful statement there.
So if
What
I
you're-
fix my robot halfway through a match, halfway through a tournament, it will not be a real-time assessment of how good I am now. It's a cumulative for the entire event. In fact, like Ed Law's world rank is an OPR for the entire year. So teams that start out and like bag the first event are never gonna get a good score using that, no matter how good they are at the end of the season, because it's like getting a bunch of Ds in your first semester. It takes a long time to get your GPA back up, same kind of thing. So what the OPR is it basically equations and unknowns. You know, for every match that you play, you know, if your alliance scores 82 points, how many points did you score? Without observing the match, nobody knows, right? But if your team is really consistently worth about 40 of those points, if I added up what all 3 members of the red alliance did and all 3 members of the blue alliance did, the sum should be the score on red and blue. So if I solve for the unknowns, if your robot was worth 40 and the other guy's worth 20 and he's worth 10, you know, the cumulative, you'd have 70. There you go, you have 70 for that alliance. So if you do a set of 80 equations with 40 unknowns in a district tournament and solve, you will get your OPR. That's basically what it is. And so the depth of the data changes as you move through the tournament. A lot of the methods won't attempt to solve it until you get at least 3 matches in. But it's really trying to give a numeric value to how many points your robot is worth. The OPR value is game specific, so it's about how many points you're scoring in this scoring schedule. Last year it was very tricky because if you were a good team to advance in last year's game with co-oping, you had to stop scoring partway through the match to go co-op, which would lower your OPR, but you would win more matches. So So that would, last year it was a very clear case where the OPR was less correlated less directly to the actual results than other things. Some games where there's a giant bonus at the end, if the bonus is really huge, the OPR can get kind of jacked up too. So you have to be careful using it. OPR also generally will not indicate defensive specialists well. It will indicate teams that get in the way of their own team's offense very clearly. So if you just get in the way a lot, and you play on the field with good teams, their score will go down. And ultimately, through the math, your team will get blamed for that, and you will have negative points on your OPR because of that. So Ed Law's sheet also does something and calculates something called CCWM. It's essentially the same sort of matrix math, but it's on the gap. It's on the difference between the winners and the losers. It takes the two scores, subtracts them, turns them into a difference, and it's how much. It's basically about how much of that difference can be applied to you. So if you're a defensive specialist, your CCWM may actually be very good, even though you never score any points and you have a low OPR. That is a way to objectively try to find the good defense specialists from a big set of data. Say your division of 100 teams in the championship. I don't know who the defense guys are. I'm going to look at this to figure it out. The Twitter feed and some of the other things, and like you said, the FRC minor, now provide individualized results for Auton, Teliap, and climbing. This is very powerful. You can use this to figure out an OPR for Auton. This guy is worth, on average, 12 points in Auton, or 13.6, or 0, right? Or climbing, and you can figure out how to deploy these guys. It makes it really easy to find the donut bots, as we call them, where guys who do Auton, bonus, have nothing in the middle, right, circle. So, you can very easy by having, whereas the composite OPR would just give you a 14 for that, and you can't tell whether that's a guy who only hits, 6 discs in Teliop, or that's a guy who does Auton and tanks. You can't tell from the standard OPR, but you can tell from this. Edge Law's sheet will compute these. And never forget, these numbers are leading indicators and should never be trusted as an absolute measure of team performance. Without observing the team, you can say that a 60 is better than a 10. You can probably say that a 40 is better than a 20. But saying that a 22 is better than an 18 in this game, the OPR data is not granular enough to really make that call.
There are also occasionally mistakes.
There are also occasionally mistakes. Also, on really good teams, you gotta watch the whole breakdown thing. Like Waterford, with you guys. We went out on the field, we had a qualifying match with you guys, and you jammed or something and scored almost nothing, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, but if you were looking at that from the outside on the data, that would drive our OPR down like 10 points. Right?
They've been so consistent.
They've been
all the
consistently scoring a ton of points, and then they play with the killer bees and their score goes way down. The math basically blames that on the two guys on your alliance, right? That's how it
We
works.
did that just to drive yours down.
I know. Yours is higher than ours. So it's not, you can't trust it. Okay, next. Okay, and in closing, it's not all about the robots. Dean likes to say it's not about the robots. It is about the robots, but it's not all about the robots. Most scouting is focused on the capability of the machine. Never forget, robots are designed by people, built by people, maintained by people, and operated by people. The human factor in everything is huge, right? If you don't know the people on the other teams, your ability to do comprehensive competitive assessment will be very limited, right? I've had this before. I've had it where we're watching a team that we're considering picking, right? We're going into the last round of qualifying, and I see their machine break. I know their coach, and I know it will be fixed. I do not have to really fear that is I know the type of people who are running that team, and that there is no way that they are not going to have that fixed in the lunch break based on. We'll still go talk to them, but knowing the people is key. We talked about trust before. A relatively high-ranked team that I've had difficulty working with, or others have assessed having difficulty working with. That's a real thing. A team who doesn't have good control of their drivers, will I be able to deploy them, right? If you don't know the people on the other teams, your ability to do comprehensive competitive assessment will be limited. So get out and meet the other coaches and drivers, and every team is different, right? Once you understand how they operate, how they work, you can better figure out ways to play with them and against them. It's just that. So every team works differently, and everybody has sort of a different path to success. There's no one right way, and it's really good to go out and understand how the other teams work, because you can learn a lot about how to run your own team too at the same time. Okay, next. Okay, and basically questions and answers, we've only got a few minutes. I don't know if anybody, is there a seminar after us?
Yes.
In 3 minutes or something? But a couple questions, yeah, Benzine.
How would you rate defensive ability?
Defensive ability is very game specific. Defensive ability, it all comes into gap, right? If what you're trying to do, certainly if you're playing in a qualifying match in the FRC or in eliminations, it really is about winning the match. It's not about how many points you score. It ultimately is about winning the match. The points are a second tier sword, right?
It also depends on what skill you're looking for.
Winning is the first tier sword. So we will always deploy a team to defense if that is the thing that is going to drive the most margin between us and what the other alliance can produce. We will look for, obviously we like someone who is versatile enough to score points and play defense if we need a defense guy, if the opportunity arises. But certainly, like this game, a lot of times we'll, at least 2 tournaments, we're picking a third guy who his primary role is defense and disruption. Anyone else? All right, good guys. Well, the Michigan State Championship is going to be great. This is going to be, no lie, this is going to be this weekend the most competitive in-season FRC robot event that has ever been hosted in the history of FRC in 22 years. So enjoy it.